talked about this earlier. I do believe that there's a transcendent ethic. And I do believe that it touches on the metaphysical. I believe that people experience that because people are perfectly capable of having unutterably profound religious experiences. And the naturalistic materialists don't know what the hell to do with that. They have no idea what to do with that fact. Say, well, it's delusional. It's like, well, hang on a sec. People who have those experiences appear to be more successful and healthier. It's like, so exactly in what manner is that delusional? And if you induce it in the lab with psilocybin, for example, among people who are dying of cancer, their fear of death goes away. It's like, you're going to just lay that out there as delusional. Or you'll quit smoking. 85% success rate with one mystical experience on psilocybin produces 85% cessation rate in smoking. Yeah. It's completely, and with MDMA, ecstasy, the 3 treatments with MDMA, that's what the current research indicates, produces a 72% cure rate for intractable post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like, those are miracle cures, and they have to be accompanied by the mystical experience. No one knows how to account for that. And so there is a transcendent ethic.
So it's a very physical thing. I mean, in a case like that, you talk about ayahuasca or any of these things, right? You're eating something, you're ingesting something, smoking it, whatever it is. It's physical, it's here and now, but the experience is metaphysical.
Sure, that's a place where the biological and the transcendent touch. And we don't know what to make of that. Yeah. Well, that's why psychedelics threw our whole culture into such a flip this upside down. No one knew what to do with them. You know, I mean, the Indians regarded psilocybin as food of the gods for a reason. And when people have encountered psychedelic substances throughout human history, that's always how they've been characterized. Yeah. That's right, food of the gods. It's like, beware of them. But they open the door to the transcendent. And, well, I think the evidence that they are doing something, that psychedelic substances are doing something that we seriously don't understand at all, not a bit, is overwhelming. Rick Strassman wrote a book on his experiences giving DMT to a whole bunch of people down in Austin, I think. And Strassman's a pretty straight scientist. You know, he was interested in measuring psychophysiological responses to the drugs. Well, he'd give people DMT and they all came back with the same story. I was blasted out of my consciousness. I met a whole bunch of alien beings. They were really surprised I was there, and then I came back, and it was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. And Strassman would say, well, you know, you had a Jungian archetypal experience, or it was a dream, and they'd say, you don't understand. Yeah. And he got so distraught because of these continual reports that he had to stop doing the research. Yeah, and I'm not making a claim for anything metaphysical here, but I'm definitely pointing out that there are undeniable realms of human experience that involve religious experience and a sense of the infinite transcendent that look like they're healthy and that you cannot deny. Yeah. Well, so what are you supposed to do with that? You put it in a box and you say, well, we're not going to pay attention to it. It's like, that's not going to work. Strange book once that made the claim that what was in the Ark of the Covenant was a mixture that was made from Amanita muscaria mushrooms. And that's not as far-fetched as you might think, because there was a mycologist, an amateur mycologist named Gordon Wasson, who established credibly the notion that it was Amanita muscaria potions that was the soma of the Rig Veda. And so it's a strange idea, but it's not an idea that's completely outside of the realm of possibility. And the Amanitas muscaria, it's the fly agaric, a red mushroom with white dots, and it's used in shamanic rituals across Asia. Right? And it's apparently not toxic in its dried form, although that is not a recommendation. You know, this is serious and dangerous speculation and material. One of the things that the priests had to do before they communed with what was ever in the Ark of the Covenant was purify themselves. And so one possibility is that the bad psychedelic experience is a involuntary confrontation with what Jung would describe as the shadow. It's like, so beware of experimenting with substances that produce divine revelations if you're in a serious state of disorder. And I do think that is what happens to people, is that they encounter everything about them that's chaotic and out of place. And some people get trapped in that and they can't get beyond it. And that's because there's so much of it. And so, but we don't know enough to know.
Well, the first thing that we should realize is that states of altered consciousness are, people have been experimenting with them forever. And God only knows what the consequence of this. I certainly believe that the old Greek mysteries were institution-induced hallucinogenic experiences. I think that most of the religious stories that we have are a consequence of psychedelic experience. Most. A substantial number of them. It certainly seems to be the case with soma, for example, which looks like it was the fly agaric mushroom, the amanita. People have been using hallucinogenic substances for a very long time, and they produce very incomprehensible sets of experiences, most recently documented by the research teams at Johns Hopkins, where they've shown that if you give people enough magic mushrooms, psilocybin, to induce a mystical experience, that you decrease their death, anxiety, and fear when they have cancer diagnosis, which is really something. And that a single dose of mushrooms that produces a mystical experience has about an 85% cure rate for smoking, which is absolutely beyond comprehension. So the psychedelic substances seem to open up another plane of existence, so to speak, and it's that part of experience that has an infinite scope. Why they do that, how they do that, what that means, God only knows. God only knows. I don't think we understand psychedelics even a bit. I don't think they fit into our current worldview. So how should they be integrated? Well, you're a fool if you play with psychedelics. What did Carl Jung say? Beware of unearned wisdom. That's pretty damn smart. So you don't play with them. If you're inclined to experiment, then you should treat them with respect. You should go into the experience with the expectation and the desire that you will learn something, painful as that's going to be, and that your life will be transformed in a positive direction. And you should pray to whatever gods you worship that they don't rip you apart. And then maybe you'll be sensible enough to learn something, and you'll be able to bring it back from the underworld, and you'll be able to integrate it into your life carefully, and you'll be a better person as a consequence. But be careful what you hope for.
So this is a fun one. This is from the Eadwine Psalter, 9th to 12th century, and that's Adam and Eve. But there is speculation that the fruit that they're eating there, you see, these psilocybin mushrooms, right? Because they're the only kind of mushroom that grow like that. So that's pretty wild, you might say. And then this is I think it's called Banisteria vine, if I remember correctly, and it's what ayahuasca is made out of, and it has this double helix form, which is very, very interesting. And the natives, nobody could figure out how the hell they made this ayahuasca, which transports people spiritually in a very intense manner. And there's a whole religion based on it, like a modern religion as well as the archaic religion. And to make this stuff, they had to take two plants that don't grow anywhere near each other. And there's like 1 million plants in the Amazon, so how do you figure that out? Nobody knows. And then you have to cook them in this very particular way for a particular amount of time before you produce this stuff. So one of the plants has DMT in it, which is a very intense psychedelic, but it's very short acting. And the other has a MAO inhibitor. So if you take the DMT and you take the MAO inhibitor, then the DMT trip lasts for much longer. And so that's what these Amazonian natives figured out. And no one has any idea how they managed it. And if you ask them, they tell you that the plants told them how to do it, which isn't much of an explanation as far as modern people are concerned. But then when modern people take the ayahuasca and the plant, so to speak, starts to talk to them, they're a little less leery of the whole theory that the plants had something to do with this. So, and these things, I'm loath to talk about this because I'm not an advocate for drug use. But by the same token, you can't ignore empirical data. It's not reasonable. And the empirical data that psychedelic substances can produce mystical experiences, and that those often have a transformative effect. I mean, one of the latest studies showed that if you took people who were dying of cancer and you gave them psilocybin in a sufficient dose to produce a mystical experience, that you radically decreased their fear of death. It's like, you got to think about that, man. That's tough. That's a tough experiment. You just wouldn't expect that. You think, you take someone, you derange them intensely, and then when they come back, they're not, even though they're dying, they're not nearly as afraid of dying. You know, you got to kind of wake up and smell the roses when you see something like that. And the people who are doing this research are very reliable people. So there's the Amanita muscaria. You know, there's this old idea, it's quite a funny idea, toadstools. So flies like Amanita muscaria. And there's some, this is ridiculous, there's some evidence that they actually like getting stoned. So, because animals will eat these, like reindeer will eat these things too, and they get pretty tripped out by them. And so I have this book on psychedelic use among animals, which is a small book, but, and so, so there's this idea that toads used to sit around the Amanita muscaria and wait for the stone flies to like buzz badly around them and then snap them up. So that's pretty funny, I think. And so, and you know, there are mushrooms in the US that are the oldest organisms on the planet. Hey, there's one mushroom, I can't remember where it is, but it covers something like, oh God, I don't know, like hundreds of square miles.